how can I know what God is like? And besides knowing what it's like, how can I know and grow in Him? Now, the key verse in the book of Hebrews is in chapter 4, verse 14. Everything in Hebrews revolves around this verse. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. So I'd like us to just all in unison read that together. So read that with me. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. So it's not that he was our great high priest. He is right now our great high priest. And so there are two things in this. First of all, that Jesus' part, what he did, what he's already done, he opened the way for us to approach God. But now it's up to us to approach God. Not just because he opened the way can everyone just approach God. There are some decisions everyone has to make on our part. And so our part is to respond in faith. The only way we can respond to that openness is in faith. And so the emphasis of this morning's message is on our part. And related to faith is something else that's very important. Faith and patience are the power twins. And this is a teaching I got from a well-known preacher known as Kenneth Copeland. And almost everywhere you find faith talked about in the Bible, where it's mentioned, you also find patience. Now, we're a lot more excited of talking about faith than we are about patience. Faith and patience are the power twins. Together, they produce every time. But they only produce when they're linked together. Because patience without faith has no power to call into reality the thing desired. Faith is the substance of things we hope for. It's the reality. Patience without faith has no substance. And faith without patience will fail to stand firm on the evidence of the Word that gives deed to things not seen. Patience undergirds faith and gives it endurance to persevere until the answer comes. Peter had the faith to step out of the boat onto the water. And he was there for, who knows, a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, we don't know, but not very long. But you see, he didn't have the patience to continue standing. Well, I'll tell you, Peter really wasn't standing on water. He was standing on Word. He was standing on, what was the Word? The Word he was standing on was come. Jesus said to him, come. So when you got a word from God, you can, symbolically speaking, walk on water. You can do anything if you have a word from God. Now I'm talking about what's called a rhema word from God, a living word from God. Not just your favorite verse in the Bible, But when the Holy Spirit energizes that word, that becomes a rhema word, and it comes to life. And so it came to life for Peter for a few seconds, but you see, he didn't have the patience because he looked at the storm. And that is when he lost, his faith was no longer undergirded. So that is a very graphic example of what we're talking about. Now, in our lives, God can give us words. They're not always as easy to see as that. But whatever our situation is, we can go through. And I remember when I was a student at Elam, my roommate was from Detroit, and he said, Christmas break was coming. He said, I want to invite you to go home with me. In fact, we were going to go from there on out to Iowa to visit his girlfriend, who was also a girl in our class. They eventually got married. And I felt like the word, I had no idea what this meant. In fact, I wondered if it was my imagination, was that God was giving me penetrating faith. What in the world is that? But it was more like a feeling. It was like, there's going to come an obstacle, and I am going to be able to get us through it. That was all I felt. So anyway, I said, sure. I mean, I was always hot to trot. Let's go somewhere. So we went in his car. We went to Detroit, stayed with his parents, and then the next day we headed out toward Iowa. It was January now, and we were going through a blizzard like I have seen a few times in my life on whatever the interstate is that goes across the bottom of Michigan. And I mean, where you could barely see, and the temperature was down well below zero, and wind. And so anyway, he took off on our next one. We started looking for a motel. And we found some, but they were all full. Everybody had already beat us to it. And I heard myself say, because we wanted to get to whatever the city is on the west side of Michigan that night, I heard myself say, I will drive and I will get us through. I thought, where did that come from? But it was like I knew I could do it, but not in myself. And so he said, well, all right. So I got in the driver's seat, and we're heading west. And I thought, how am I going to see? And a tractor trailer came along, and I pulled in behind him. They have 7 lights. I just followed those lights. I couldn't get too close. That would have been dangerous. I couldn't get too far back or he disappeared. I had to stay right in the right position. And I began to feel the motor quitting now and then, just for split seconds. Oh, God. He said, why are you praying? I said, oh, just feeling spiritual. And but if that car had quit, if there had been farms, we wouldn't even been able to see them. We could have frozen to death. We just kept going. Finally, there was our exit. Like a couple hours later, I pulled up on that ramp to the top, and the engine died. And we coasted. It was into a gas station. This was, of course, payphone years. Went to a payphone, and he called a girl he used to date. And she said, I'm sorry, I'm married. So, well, that was a dead end. So he called some pastor he knew, because he used to have be in a quartet that traveled North America singing. Pastor remembered him. Oh, in fact, it was New Year's. And he said, well, I'll come and get you, but I have young people in my house, and we have an all-night party. We said, we don't care. We just want to get inside. And I think we just we slept through all the noise. Got the car. It'd be interesting mechanically to tell you what went wrong, but I don't have time. I'll tell you at the picnic. And we went on. And from there, the weather cleared up. But it was an example of what I'm talking about. I had a word from God. Now, this time it wasn't necessarily from the scriptures, but it was like, come. And I moved out on it, and it worked. Well, so Hebrews 6:12, we do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised. So we have promises, all kinds of promises. But the writer here is wanting us, by faith and patience, to move into those promises. And James says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. In other versions, that's patience. Perseverance, patience, must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So this is talking about growing up spiritually. Now, a preacher friend of mine who used to minister in conferences was preaching on patience one time. I think it was in Texas somewhere. And so he gave an altar call for anyone that wanted prayer. And so he went up to this one lady and put his hand on her head and he said, what is your need, sister? And she said, pray for me to have patience. So he said, Lord, I pray that you bring trials and tribulations into this life. She grabbed his hand and she said, that's not what I asked for. I asked for patience. He said, how do you think you're going to get it? God doesn't just give you patience. He takes us through things. And that is where, if we cooperate, patience is developed. So, on the back of your bulletin, I just have, I think, 3 little fill-in-the-blanks if you want to bother. The power twins of a victorious Christian life are patience and faith. Now, I'll give you an example where I was really tried. I should say we were really tried. When God sent us to Paraguay. We did not want to go to Paraguay. Maybe you think that we went to Paraguay just because that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to go back to Argentina. We loved Argentina. God made me Argentine. I could have lived in Argentina without a call of God. It's a fantastic country. But God said, you're going to Paraguay. And there were lots. This was a work that had already started, a Christian work that had more problems in it than any Christian work I had ever seen before or since. And that was the main reason I didn't want to go. But we went because God gave me so many confirmations, he removed every possible excuse. So we were there. And it just did not seem like anything was progressing. And I said, Lord, it's not just out of disobedience, but why don't you send us somewhere where we can accomplish something? We're accomplishing nothing here. This work had been these people had been so mistreated by the previous leadership, they didn't trust anyone in spiritual leadership anymore. There were some who wouldn't even speak to us. They wouldn't even greet us. They were so hurt. And it wasn't so much out of just old-fashioned disobedience, but it's like we're accomplishing nothing. I said, God, to stay here, I need a word from you. And I don't know if it was like the next day but right after that, reading my Bible, this verse jumped out. I said, Lord, this verse was not in the Bible yesterday. That's the way it seems. Who knows how many times I had read it. But it was this, from Titus 1:5. Paul speaking to his disciple Titus. The reason I left you in Crete was that you might straighten out what was left unfinished and appoint elders or raise up leaders. I now had a word from God. I could now go through anything because I knew why God wanted us there. And it wasn't that a whole lot happened right away, but when it did, our church went from 40 people to 120 and became, in fact, the largest church in the country. That's how new evangelical Christianity was. I mean, we had a mega church. I mean, there's churches in Paraguay now that are thousands. But that was almost every evangelical pastor in the country knew each other. That's how small evangelical Christianity was. But now we could stay no matter what. In fact, that became my ministry. If you think I'm in the pastorate just to preach sermons in churches, everywhere God has sent us, every ministry I've had to take over has been in a mess. It's been on its last legs. And it's like the person who was there before me just left it, not always with huge problems, but in no order. When I became director of worldwide missions for Elam Fellowship, when I came in, God gave me 7 goals that I needed to accomplish. So I thought I was going to do it in the first month. It took 7 years to get through those because I had to work with committees and boards and corporation level. By the time I finally got something accomplished, it was like, yeah, we did it. All the joy was sapped out of it. It took 7 years, Anyway, we did it. And then when I was made director of student internships at Elam Bible Institute, there weren't even any written guidelines on what I was supposed to be responsible for. And it just has gone like that. But you know what? I enjoy it. It's full of headaches, but it's a sense of accomplishment. Give me my next mess. I'm going to be 79 years old. I'm not sure how many more messes I can be handled. But it's a sense of accomplishment. It's me. When things get in order, I get bored. Give me a new mess. Well, anyway, that is where I was tested on having to step out in faith when it just didn't look like anything was going to happen and we were going to sink. Now, the purpose of Hebrews was to prepare the Jewish Christians for the approaching fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So this was written to Christian Jews, not just to Christians in general. And after accepting Jesus as their Messiah, but they continued to be zealous for the temple rites and sacrifices and still trying to follow the Mosaic law. And they thought that Jesus was about to return and that Jerusalem was about to become the capital of the world. And that is why, if you're familiar with Hebrews, the writer goes through and shows how all of the Old Testament sacrifices are over and done with because they were all fulfilled in the person of Jesus. Well, let's come back to something else here. We're wanting to know, how can you know God and how can you grow in Him? In 1951, the United States experimented with a new atomic bomb explosion on an atoll in the Pacific called Anahuac. And but they wanted to take a photograph. Now, some of you have seen my little illustration here, but not as much in depth as I'm going to show you now. Now, the radiation from this explosion, even from hundreds of miles away, was so intense that you could not use regular photographic film. They had to use a pine board. It burned the picture into the wood because the radiation would be unbearable. It would destroy the film. So this is, they used what's called a pinhole camera. It doesn't even have a glass lens. If you know anything about photography, maybe you've heard of a pinhole camera. So the light goes in through a very small hole, and it acts just like a lens and projects the image on the back. So they put in their pine board film, turned it to the atomic explosion, had to just uncover the hole a certain amount of time, recap it, and they took out the pine board, and there was the picture of the atomic explosion burned right into the wood. So, using that kind of an illustration, let's look at John 1:18 that says, "No one has ever seen God." In another place, that no one has ever seen God and lived. Why? Because the intensity of his power would destroy anyone that got that close. Not as punishment, but in the same way that trying to take a picture of an atomic blast on film would destroy the film, it would destroy a person. So, number 2 in your fill-in is when the scriptures say that no one has ever seen God, it's talking about God the Father. God the Father. It's just understood in the scriptures. So now we want to take a picture of God the Father. Well, if we think that the radiation from an atomic blast would be destructive, that would be like not even a firecracker compared to the intensity of the radiation of the glory of God. Well, let's follow our parallel illustration here. So now we're going to take a picture of God the Father. Put in our pine board. Uncap the lens. And what are we going to get on our pine board? A picture of what the Father is like. Jesus. Jesus. That is why the Father sent him, so we could know what he is like. No one has ever seen God but God the only Son, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. Now, it's really amazing the kind of biblical principles God can give any of us through things in life. If I were to tell you some of the things God has used to point out something to me just through an everyday thing, you would probably find some of them silly, but it worked because it was for me. God will have some silly thing for you. But one of those things was when I was taking statistics in college. And in fact, the name of our statistics textbook was Statistics Without Tears, because that's how it affects most people. Except Lauren, he reads statistics textbooks for leisure. So that undefinable blob there is something. We want to know what that thing is. So how are we going to know what is it like? So you have to take samples of it. And you try to draw some conclusions from samples. But there is always a percentage of error. Now, you'll hear these terms even watching the news when They give you the statistics about something, politics or what, medicine, but there's always a percentage of error. In other words, they never know exactly what something is like. So, how do we know what God is like? What are the samples? Well, this is how Hebrews begins. So, in the past, verse 1 of Hebrews 1, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. So the prophets in the Old Testament began to give humanity some idea of what God was like. That is why God raised up the Jewish nation, because it was through them he gave the law, he gave his word, so that we could begin to know, we know there's a God out there, but what is he like? And then the samples are Abraham, Moses, Joshua, David, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, angels. And these are all the people that are mentioned in Hebrews. Because these were Israel's heroes. They were their folk heroes. And so the writer of Hebrews mentions all of them, because the Jews knew who they were. And so he's talking their language. He's got their attention. But just using the angels as one example, it goes into chapter in verses 5 through 13 in Hebrews 1. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son. Today I have become your father"? Or again, "I will be his father and he will be my son." And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all the blood of God's angels worship him. And speaking of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds, his servants flames of fire. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, Son, the God, Son, will last forever and ever. And righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, God the Father, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. He also says, in the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. He's talking about Jesus here. They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end. To which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool? But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. In other words, in the former days, he had spoken to humanity through all of Israel's heroes, the samples. But in these last days, he has revealed himself to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. Some scientists came up with this attempt at a map of the universe. This is the largest ever map of the universe, and you are here, give or take a few billion miles. The sun is the radiance, the exact representation of his being. Right here. What's God like? Right here. Everything that you learn about Jesus, you know that's what the Father is like. Representation about what? About what God is like. The Father. I'm coming down toward the end here. So, number 3 in your fill-in, the only 100% understanding, no percentage of error, 0% of error, 100% accurate. The only 100% understanding we have of the nature of God the Father is what is like is Jesus. Now a few verses here. Jesus answered, talking to his disciples, I am the way and the truth and the life. The truth about what? The truth about what God the Father's like. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, how many of you know Jesus didn't pick his disciples because of their IQs? Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you are not my own. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. How many of you are old enough to remember the TV program, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Anybody remember that? The book of Hebrews shows us God's answer. It's Jesus, and that's my final answer. Back to our key verse, coming down to a close. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, Jesus. The first step in living a victorious Christian life is a personal revelation of just who Jesus is. There are a lot of people who are saved, but who need an encounter with God. They need a personal revelation that begins the process of transforming their lives. And when I see someone, a believer, who is not changing, they need an encounter. So then, who are the power twins that are necessary for you to know and to grow? Somebody tell me. Who are the power twins? Very good. Patience and faith in any order. Patience without faith has no power to call into reality the things desired. The worship team can head back. Faith is the substance of things we hope for. Patience without faith has no substance. Faith without patience will fail to stand firm on the evidence of the word that God gives deed to the things not seen. Jesus prayed for Peter, his faith fail not. Patience undergirds faith and gives it endurance to persevere until the answer comes. How you can know and grow in him. Let's stand and worship.